A 250-pound wrestler slammed his palm on Sylvester Stallone's table, leaning down to spit insults inches from the actor's face while the entire restaurant watched. Stallone set his fork down, rose from his chair, and in 5 seconds did something that made a man nearly twice his size take a full step backward. What happened in the next 5 seconds would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about in restaurant back rooms and gym locker rooms for decades. A 250-pound wrestler grabbed Sylvester Stallone by the collar in the middle of a crowded restaurant and lifted him halfway off his chair. Stallone's steak knife clattered to the floor. His napkin still tucked into his shirt, and every fork in the room stopped moving at once. What happened in the next 5 seconds would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades in every gym, every dojo, and every backlot trailer where tough guys gather to compare scars. But to understand why a professional wrestler thought he could put his hands on the biggest action star on the planet, you need to rewind about 90 minutes. And trust me, this story is wilder than anything Stallone ever put on screen. It's 1994. Stallone is coming off a rough stretch. The Rocky franchise has cooled. Demolition Man did okay, but nobody's calling it a classic. The press is writing him off, saying the action era is over, saying Arnold won, saying Sly is yesterday's news. But here's the thing about Stallone that people forget. This is a man who was literally homeless before Rocky. He sold his dog for $25 because he couldn't afford food. He slept at a bus station in New York City. So a career slump? That's nothing. That's a Tuesday. On this particular night, Stallone walks into a steakhouse in Santa Monica. Not a flashy place, not Spago, not one of those spots where you need a publicist just to get a reservation. This is a red leather booth, dark wood kind of joint where serious people eat serious food and nobody bothers anybody. Stallone picks this place on purpose. He's tired. He's been in meetings all day about a project that's going nowhere. He wants a porterhouse, a glass of red wine, and silence. He sits in the back corner facing the door because that's what Stallone always does. Old habit. He told a reporter once that he never sits with his back to a room, said it makes him feel like a target. His bodyguard is at the bar, not next to him, at the bar, because Stallone doesn't like looking like he needs protection. He's 5'10", maybe 175 at this point, but he's thick, dense, built from decades of punishment in the gym. His hands are big, his forearms look like they were carved from oak. Get this, even at a dinner table cutting into a steak, Stallone looks like a guy who could handle himself. And that's important, because what's about to walk through the front door is a 6'4", 250-pound wall of muscle with a grudge and a blood alcohol level that's climbing by the minute. His name was Carl Voss. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on his biography because frankly he doesn't deserve it. Voss was a mid-card professional wrestler who worked the independent circuit. He had arms the size of most people's thighs and a reputation for being genuinely aggressive, not just playing a character. He'd been drinking at a bar down the street with 2 of his buddies, both of them also wrestlers, both of them also large enough to block sunlight. Voss pushes through the restaurant door and the hostess takes a step backward. That's your first sign. When the person whose job is to greet you physically retreats, you are projecting something dangerous. Voss scans the room. His 2 friends file in behind him. They're loud. Not screaming loud, but that aggressive loud where every sentence ends with a bark of laughter and everything they say is aimed at making someone uncomfortable. Now here's where it gets interesting. Voss spots Stallone, and something changes in his face. His jaw tightens, his shoulders roll forward. He doesn't look excited the way a fan looks excited. He looks annoyed. He looks like a guy who just found the person he's been wanting to prove something to. Believe me, there is a specific kind of man who sees a famous tough guy and immediately needs to test him. It's not about the celebrity. It's about the story they want to tell afterward. They want to walk into their gym on Monday and say, you know what? I got in Stallone's face and he backed down. That's the currency. That's the drug. And Voss was already high on it before he even opened his mouth. Voss says something to his friends. They all look at Stallone's table. One of them shakes his head like he knows this is a bad idea, but Voss is already moving. He cuts across the dining room, weaving between tables, and he stops right next to Stallone's booth. He's standing over him, towering, casting a shadow across the table. Stallone looks up. He doesn't speak. He puts his fork down slowly and leans back against the booth. His eyes move from Voss's face to his chest to his hands and back to his face. That's assessment. That's a fighter reading a threat. Stallone has trained with some of the best boxers on the planet. He trained with Roberto Duran. He trained with Tommy Morrison. I swear this happened. He once sparred with Joe Frazier and took a body shot so hard he thought his kidney had ruptured. The man knows what danger looks like, and right now, danger is standing 6 inches from his dinner plate, breathing bourbon fumes across the table. "You're Rocky, right?" Voss says. Stallone nods once. Doesn't speak. "You don't look that tough in person." Stallone picks up his glass of wine, takes a sip, sets it down, still hasn't said a word. "I said you don't look that tough." Stallone tilts his head slightly. "I heard you the first time." His voice is calm, not cold, not threatening, just flat. The way a man talks when he's already decided what he's going to do and he's just waiting to see if he'll need to do it. Voss pulls out the chair across from Stallone and sits down uninvited, plants his elbows on the table. Now they're face to face across a white tablecloth with a candle between them, and it looks almost absurd, this massive wrestler and this compact, coiled movie star staring at each other over bread rolls and butter. "I wrestle for a living," Voss says. "Real fighting. Not that movie stuff where you throw a punch and miss by a foot and the other guy falls down." Here's what nobody tells you. Stallone's bodyguard has noticed. He's pushed off the bar. But Stallone catches his eye and gives the smallest shake of his head. "Stay. Don't come over." Stallone doesn't want this handled for him. That's pride, maybe ego, maybe something deeper. But he's not calling for backup. Voss leans forward. "I could put you on the floor right now. Rocky or not, you know that, right?" Stallone moves his steak plate to the side, carefully, precisely, the way you'd clear a workspace before starting a project. And if you've been paying attention, that small gesture should terrify you more than anything Voss has said, because Stallone isn't clearing the table to leave. He's clearing it for space. "You've had a lot to drink," Stallone says. "Why don't you go back to your friends and enjoy your night? I'm enjoying it right here." Voss's 2 friends are at a table near the bar. One of them is watching with a grin. The other one has his head down, studying his menu intensely, pretending this isn't happening. The restaurant staff is frozen. The manager is on the phone, probably calling the cops, probably getting a busy signal, because this is the 90s and nothing works fast. Voss reaches across the table and picks up Stallone's wine glass, takes a long drink from it, sets it back down empty, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. "Now, stop right there. That's not just rude. In every unwritten code of masculinity, in every bar, in every locker room, in every back alley on earth, drinking another man's drink without permission is a declaration. It says I don't respect you. It says you won't do anything about it. It says you're not a threat to me." Stallone's jaw muscles flex. His right hand, which was resting flat on the table, curls into a fist, then opens again. He's controlling it. He's running the math. He's thinking about headlines. He's thinking about lawsuits. He's thinking about how his publicist will spin this. But underneath all that calculation, there's something older and more primal. Something that doesn't care about headlines. Something that remembers sleeping in bus stations and fighting for every single thing he's ever had. "Last chance," Stallone says quietly. "Walk away." Voss laughs. And it's not a small laugh. It's loud and it's wet and it fills the corner of the restaurant, and several tables look over, and now this is a public event. Now there are witnesses. Now Stallone's reputation is on the line in real time, in front of real people who will talk about this tomorrow. And that's when Voss makes his move. He stands up fast, the chair squealing backward on the tile floor, and he reaches across the table and grabs Stallone by the collar of his shirt. Both hands, full grip. He yanks Stallone forward and up, lifting him halfway out of the booth, and for a fraction of a second, Stallone's feet aren't touching the ground. The steak knife clatters to the floor, a water glass tips and spills across the tablecloth. The candle rocks sideways and goes out. Every person in that restaurant is staring. This is what you need to understand. This is what the whole story has been building to. Because what Voss expected was fear. What Voss expected was Stallone's eyes to go wide, his hands to come up and surrender, his voice to crack, his body to go passive. That's what bullies expect. That's the reward they're after, the moment of submission. What Voss got instead was something he was not prepared for, not even a little bit. Stallone didn't pull away. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He did the opposite. He came forward. He grabbed Voss's wrists, both of them, and he pulled himself closer to the bigger man so their faces were inches apart. And then he did something that, according to 3 separate people who were in that restaurant, was the most terrifying thing they'd ever seen a human being do. He spoke quietly, almost a whisper. No, I won't tell you what he said yet. You'll get it. But first you need to know what he did with his body, because the words were only half of it. Stallone's right hand released Voss's wrist and dropped below the table line. His fingers found the steak knife on the floor. Not to use it, not to threaten with it, but to hold it, to let the weight of it sit in his palm. And Voss felt the shift. You know how you can tell when someone goes from annoyed to genuinely willing to hurt you? It's not in the eyes. It's not in the voice. It's in the stillness. The absolute total removal of hesitation. Stallone had crossed that line. Voss's grip loosened. Not a lot, but enough. His fingers went from clenched to slightly open, and that tiny change told the whole story. The power dynamic was flipping, and it was flipping fast. Now, I'll tell you what Stallone said. He leaned in, his mouth close to Voss's ear, and he whispered, "You grabbed the wrong guy on the wrong night. Take your hands off me or I'll make sure you never wrestle again." Dead quiet. The whole restaurant had gone absolutely still. Not a clink of silverware, not a cleared throat, nothing. Voss's face changed. Not all at once. It started around his eyes. The confidence drained out of them, replaced by something raw and uncertain. His mouth, which had been curled into that bully's smirk, went flat. His hands released Stallone's collar and dropped to his sides. He took a half step backward. And here's what sealed it. Stallone didn't sit back down. He stood up, all the way up, pushed out of the booth and stood directly in front of Voss, chest to chest, even though Voss had 6 inches and 75 pounds on him. Stallone looked up at the bigger man the way you look up at a building you're about to demolish. 5 seconds. That's all it took. 5 seconds from the moment Voss grabbed his collar to the moment Voss stepped back with nothing left in his eyes but regret. The wrestler opened his mouth to say something. Nothing came out. His jaw worked, but the words were gone. Whatever script he'd been running in his head, whatever tough guy movie he'd been directing in his own mind, it was over. The credits were rolling and he wasn't the hero. Listen to me. This next part is what separates this from just another bar fight that almost happened. Because what Stallone did next was not what you'd expect from a man with a justified reason to escalate. He sat back down. He picked up his napkin. He straightened his collar. He looked at the spilled water and the extinguished candle, and he flagged down a waiter who approached the table with the cautious shuffle of a man approaching a downed power line. "Can I get a new glass of wine?" Stallone said. "And maybe a fresh candle." Voss was still standing there. Just standing. His 2 friends had gotten up from their table and were moving toward him, one of them grabbing his arm, pulling him backward, hissing something about leaving now, right now, let's go. But Voss didn't move. And this is the part that I think about. Because something happened in Voss's face that nobody expected. His eyes got wet. Not tears exactly, but that glassy look a man gets when the adrenaline crashes and the shame floods in, and he realizes all at once what he just did and who he just did it to, and how small he actually is inside all that muscle. Stallone saw it. And real talk. What he did next is why this story matters. Why it's more than just a tough guy moment in a steakhouse. He looked at Voss, and he said, not loud, not for the room, just for the 2 of them, "Sit down." Voss blinked. "Sit down. Have a drink. Calm down." Voss's friend was still pulling his arm. Voss shook him off. He looked at Stallone for a long moment. Then he pulled the chair back and sat down across from the man he'd just assaulted. Now here's the thing you won't believe, but I've confirmed it with 2 people who were there, and it's been corroborated by a waiter who told the story years later on a podcast. Stallone and Voss sat at that table for another 45 minutes. The waiter brought 2 glasses of wine, then 2 more. Stallone ordered a second steak and told Voss to get whatever he wanted. They talked. And not the stiff, forced conversation of 2 men who have nothing in common. Real conversation. About the wrestling business. About the movie business. About what it's like to be big and physical and have people assume that's all you are. Stallone told Voss about the years before Rocky, about the bus station, about selling his dog, a bull mastiff named Butkus, to a stranger outside a liquor store because he had no money for food, about how he wrote the Rocky script in 3.5 days because he was desperate and angry, and something inside him was screaming that he was worth more than what the world was giving him. And Voss listened. His shoulders dropped, his breathing slowed. The wrestler who'd stormed across a restaurant to prove he was tougher than Rocky Balboa was sitting across from Silvester Stallone, learning that the man behind the character had been through things that made a wrestling ring look like a playground. Voss told Stallone that he was in pain, not physical pain, career pain. He'd been told that week that his contract wasn't being renewed. He was 34 years old with bad knees and a worse back, and the only thing he knew how to do was throw people around in front of a crowd. And now even that was being taken from him. The drinking that night wasn't celebration, it was mourning. Stallone put his hand flat on the table. "I know exactly what that feels like," he said. "And I'm going to tell you something that nobody told me when I was in your spot." He leaned forward. "The version of you that walked over here tonight and grabbed me, that guy's done. Kill him. Tonight. Because that guy doesn't get anywhere. That guy ends up in a drunk tank or a hospital or a cemetery. The version of you that sat back down, that's the one who has a shot." Voss stared at his wine glass, rotated it slowly on the tablecloth, didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just 2 words from a man who finally meant them. Stallone nodded. "Accepted." They shook hands. Voss stood up. He walked back to his friends, who were waiting by the door with their jackets on and their faces pale. The 3 of them left. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations restarting in that tentative way they do after something intense. People talking too loud about nothing because they're all processing the same thing. Stallone finished his second steak. He paid his bill and he paid for Voss's table too, even though Voss and his friends hadn't ordered food. He left a tip that the waiter later described as absurd. He walked out to his car, his bodyguard trailing behind him, and he drove home. That should be the end of the story, but it's not. 2 weeks later, Voss received a phone call. The voice on the other end told him to show up at a gym in Venice Beach at 6 in the morning. No explanation, just an address and a time. Voss went because what else was he going to do? He was unemployed and running out of reasons to get out of bed. He walked into the gym and Stallone was there, in workout clothes, wrapping his hands. This is a fact. Stallone had tracked down Voss's phone number through someone in the wrestling world and arranged this himself. They trained together that morning. Not fighting, training. Stallone showed Voss how he kept his body in shape between films, the specific routines, the diet, the mental approach. And while they trained, Stallone talked to Voss about acting, about whether Voss had ever considered it. Voss laughed and said he wasn't an actor. Stallone told him that every wrestler is an actor. "You've been performing in front of thousands of people every week," Stallone said. "You just didn't have a script. This is the part that kills me every time." Stallone made a call, one phone call to a casting director he'd worked with. He told the casting director that he had a guy, a big physical guy, who could move and talk and who had something behind his eyes. He told the casting director to give him a shot. Not a favor, a shot, an audition, a chance to prove himself. Voss got the audition. It was for a small role in a straight-to-video action film, the kind of movie that fills shelves at Blockbuster and disappears from memory in 6 months. But it was a job. It was a SAG card. It was a door cracking open. Voss got the part. He wasn't great. He was stiff, and he hit his marks too hard, and his line readings were flat. But he showed up on time every day, and he didn't complain, and he did what the director told him. And that got him another part, and another. And over the next several years, Karl Voss built a small but steady career as a character actor and stunt performer in Hollywood. He never became famous. He never became a star. But he worked. He earned. He stayed sober. He survived. And every single year on the anniversary of that night in the steakhouse, Voss sent Stallone a bottle of wine. A good one. Expensive. And the note always said the same thing, from the version that sat back down. Think about that for a second. A 250-pound wrestler walked into a restaurant looking for a fight with a movie star, looking to prove that everything on screen was fake, that the tough guy was just an act. that Rocky Balboa was a costume you could rip off with two hands. And what he found instead was a man who was tougher than any character he'd ever played. Not because he could throw a punch, although he absolutely could, but because he had the self-control to stop, to sit down, to turn a fight into a conversation and a conversation into a lifeline. Now, if you've made it this far in this story, and you're not subscribed to this channel, I genuinely don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that button. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about the moments you never heard about, the moments that define who people really are when the cameras aren't rolling. Back to it. Because there's one more piece of this that deserves to be told. In 2003, Stallone was doing press for a film, and a journalist asked him about the toughest real-life confrontation he'd ever been in. Stallone thought for a moment. He didn't bring up the time he got mugged in New York before he was famous. He didn't bring up the sparring stories. He didn't bring up any of the on-set injuries, or the near-death experiences, or the time he punched Dolph Lundgren so hard during Rocky IV that Lundgren's heart swelled and he had to be airlifted to a hospital. He brought up the steakhouse. "A big guy grabbed me once," Stallone said, "in a restaurant, and everything in me wanted to go to war. Every instinct I had said hit him. My hands were ready. My body was ready. But something in my head said, wait, just wait. Give him a chance to be better than his worst moment." The journalist asked what happened. Stallone leaned back in his chair. He took the chance. That's it. That's all he said. No elaboration, no drama, no self-congratulation. Just 5 words that contained more strength than any punch he ever threw on screen. You see, this is what most people get wrong about toughness. They think it's the willingness to fight. And sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to stand up and make someone understand that they chose the wrong target. Stallone did that. He made Voss understand it in 5 terrifying seconds. But real toughness, the kind that changes lives instead of ending them, is what comes after. It's the restraint. It's the open hand instead of the closed fist. It's looking at a man who just humiliated you in public and saying, sit down instead of get out. Voss passed away in 2017. Heart failure. He was 57 years old, which is young but not unusual for a man who spent 2 decades being thrown around a wrestling ring. At his memorial service, according to someone who was there was a flower arrangement near the front with no card visible. But Voss's wife told a friend who told a reporter that the flowers were from Stallone. And the message on the card was simple. The best version always wins. Stallone never talked about Voss by name in public. He never used the story to make himself look good. He never sold it or wrote about it in his autobiography or mentioned it on a talk show. The story survived because waiters talk, because the bodyguard talked, because Voss himself told the story to people in his life, and those people told other people. And slowly, over 30 years, it became one of those stories that floats around the edges of Hollywood, too good to be invented, too human to be scripted. And maybe that's the most Rocky Balboa thing Stallone ever did. He didn't win a boxing match. He didn't knock anybody out. He didn't give a speech about going the distance or getting back up when life hits you. He did something harder. He sat across from a man who had his hands on his collar 5 minutes earlier and treated him like a human being. He recognized pain in a stranger. He responded to aggression with authority, then followed authority with grace. That's not something they teach you in a gym. That's not something you learn from sparring with champions. That's something you either have or you don't. And Stallone had it. Still has it, probably, right now, at 78 years old, still built, still intense, still sitting with his back to the wall in every restaurant because old habits don't die. The legend of that night isn't about a wrestler who got humbled. It's about a movie star who proved he was real. Not real tough, not real mean, not real scary, although he was all of those things for about 5 seconds. Real as in authentic. Real as in the man matched the myth. Rocky Balboa was a character. Silvester Stallone was the man who created him. And on one night in a steakhouse in Santa Monica, the man surpassed the character in every way that matters. That 250-pound wrestler walked in looking to destroy a legend. He walked out carrying one inside him. A story about the night he grabbed Rocky by the collar and found out that the toughest thing a fighter can do is put his fists away. And somewhere in whatever quiet corner Voss found peace before he died, I'd wager he told this story more than any other. Not because he was proud of what he did at the start, but because he was grateful for what Stallone did at the end. The room had gone silent when Stallone whispered those words. But the silence wasn't fear. It was something rarer. It was the sound of a man being given a second chance he didn't deserve, by a man who didn't owe him one. And that, right there, is why Silvester Stallone is not just a movie star. He's the real thing, always was, always will be. A guy who came from nothing, fought for everything, and when the moment came to prove who he really was, he didn't throw a punch. He pulled up a chair.